Nepal is a landlocked country in South Asia. It is also not a very spacious country, being locked within the Himalayan mountain range. But of course, Nepal also has its own cultures and civilization apart from its neighbors. Speaking of neighbors, as a landlocked country, it surely has a lot of historical relations with them. Before that, let's locate it first on the map, shall we? As mentioned earlier, Nepal is located within South Asia, mainly situated in the Himalayas. Its capital is Kathmandu, also the largest city. As of 2018, there are around 28 million people, most of them belonging to different ethnic groups. Nepali is the official language, but there are lots of other regional languages spoken in the country. Most Nepalese adhere to Hinduism, while there are other sizable minority religions too, like Buddhism and Islam. Nepal's geography shapes its history and culture. You may think it's all mountains because of the Himalayas, but it's not all that. There are fertile plains in the south, subalpine forested hills in the middle, and of course mountains in the north, which includes Mount Everest, the world's tallest mountain. Its location between the Eurasian and Indian plates means that this country also gets earthquakes, with some becoming very strong. Now, on Nepal's neighbors. Well, you can easily tell it. China, specifically Tibet to the north, and India to the south, east, and west. India's Siliguri corridor, which separates northeast India from the rest of India, divides Nepal and Bangladesh. Nepal and Bhutan in the east are divided by India's Sikkim, and those are Nepal's neighbors. Now let's go to each individual country. Nepal's northern neighbor is the People's Republic of China, which is massive. The two countries share a range of 1,414-kilometer long border in the Himalayan mountain range, which is the northern side of Nepal. However, Nepal exclusively borders Tibet, an autonomous region of China. The border cuts through the Himalayan mountains, even Mount Everest itself. The relations of these two countries are mostly cordial and friendly, with some hiccups. The relations as neighbors are also old, and this brings us into history. Historical relations are strong, mostly with Tibet. Often, people would travel through the Himalayas and share their cultures. Buddhism is also brought to Tibet from Nepal, mostly attributed to the efforts of the Nepalese princess Brikuti. Nepal, and by extension Tibet, is also seen as a link between Indian and Chinese kingdoms, but due to its geography, the route is much more challenging to cross. It isn't all good though. Tensions occasionally erupt and lead to conflicts, such as the Sino-Nepalese War of 1788 to 1789, in which Nepal invaded Tibet. The Qing dynasty of China counterattacked and ended in a military stalemate, but Nepal managed to get Tibetans to pay an annual tribute. There are several more confrontations between the Qing and Tibet and Nepal. The Nepalese couldn't act freely though, as they are also concerned with the British Raj, and Nepal sought to balance the two powers to avoid getting swallowed. And that is because Nepal had fought the British and got defeated. They supported the British during its expedition to Tibet and broke off relations with China after the Tibetans have kicked out the Chinese. After the communist victory in the Chinese Civil War, Nepal is concerned about its own territorial integrity after Tibet was occupied and subsequently annexed by Chinese forces, which drove them into India for support, although they would have their own squabbling. More on that in a bit though. In 1955, Nepal restored diplomatic relations with China, and both countries started to improve their relations. Nepal was neutral in the Sino-Indian War, and with good reason, totally not a Switzerland of the East geographically, right? But they did comply with some Indian requests. During the unrest by the government against the Maoist insurgency, China supported the Nepalese government, quite hypocritical to fight their fellow Maoists, although the takeover of the new Maoist-led government in 2008 had seen the Chinese relations go up. Economic ties are big, and there are even transportation links from Nepal to Tibet. However, Nepal and China still have their hiccups, and a big part of it is its border. Some Nepalese territory is kind of claimed or something like that by China and even tries to encroach despite the objection of several Nepali officials, although the government wouldn't want to disrupt their big sugar daddy. Despite this, both countries have cordial relations, and is Nepal also seen by China as a card that can be used against its larger adversary. Speaking of larger adversary, Nepal's southern neighbor is India, a big player in the region. It shares a very long border with a length reaching 1,770 kilometers. The current border was delimited after the Sugauli Treaty of 1816 between Nepal and British Raj. With such a long border, these two countries share a lot in common, especially in terms of culture. However, these two countries have ups and downs, and they also have disagreements despite having a special relationship. And this special relationship traces back in history. Relations date back a long time ago, when the Indian subcontinent was fractured amongst different kingdoms and states. However, the culture of North India and Nepal have influenced each other, and the peoples from these areas have a great deal of interaction. One primary influence is religion. Hinduism is a predominant religion in Nepal today, while Buddhism is heavily preserved and valued. Although both India and Nepal claim that Buddhism originated from their own country, specifically Gautama Buddha, but that's another story. Time marched on, and then the British showed up. Much of India became part of the British Raj, and they are keen on expanding into Nepal as well, so they fought the Nepalese and won. However, Britain didn't make Nepal a formal part of the British Raj, which is a big deal knowing that the Brits had just declared that Nepal would not be part of what would become India, and nobody is going to argue with the most powerful empire at that point. In fact, Britain recognized Nepalese sovereignty since both countries have pretty good relations, and they promised to respect Nepal's territorial integrity. After Indian independence, Nepal turned to India for what support it could offer, and the Indians are pretty keen to have Nepal on their side by signing a treaty of peace and friendship that indicates their special relationship in the 1950s. However, it is clear that this relationship will have its difficulties as well. The main issues include politics, treatment of respective nationalities, economic sanctions by India over Nepal due to non-compliance with their demands, and also border disputes. These difficulties had pushed Nepal closer to China. Then India would try to win Nepal back because they didn't really want the rival to gain too much influence in India's backyard. Even though these difficulties happen, Nepal and India are still very strong partners, especially in trade. The border is also open, and both Indians and Nepalis can work or live in the other country. Ultimately, the aim for Nepal is to balance these two large powers and prevent them from gaining too much influence in the country, like how Switzerland balanced the European powers in the past. Nepal's geography certainly makes a foreign power harder to hold though, in case it was invaded. However, as both are rapidly increasing their power, Nepal has to ensure stability within the relationship of these two countries. Nepal also has relations with its backyard, most notably Bangladesh, Bhutan, and Pakistan. In general, Nepal and Bangladesh have cool relations. Nepal was one of the first nations to recognize Bangladeshi independence, so that's a good starting point. They have some trade with small hiccups, but the big barrier is the Siliguri corridor. But nevertheless, they continue to cooperate a lot in many fields. Nepal also has some ties to Bhutan as a fellow Himalayan country, signing several agreements. They are also surrounded by two massive neighbors. However, there are many more issues. most notably, ethnic minorities and refugees. Bhutan has Nepali-speaking ethnic minorities and they try to sweep them out in order to preserve the Bhutanese cultural purity, as they have claimed. These Nepali descent Bhutanese citizens are forced out back into Nepal, but negotiations with Nepal produce little results, and as a result, the relations are kind of strained. Nepal and Pakistan also have cordial relations, but their starting point is blurred since Nepal mostly aligned with India in the first. When India started to encroach a bit more, Nepal started to establish ties with Pakistan to balance things out. And things were up for both, except for that one hiccup when Pakistan broke up relations to Nepal as a response to its recognition of Bangladesh. But that was sorted out soon. They have expanded their bilateral trade and military cooperation as a means to counter Indian influence. For others, Nepal has a close ties with mostly Buddhist countries like Cambodia, Thailand, Myanmar, and Sri Lanka as good sources for tourism, while international partners like the EU and the US do help Nepal, especially in times of need. The last thing is Britain. Even though they have initially rocky relations, things have improved after the hostilities and they are still important partners. After all, Nepal is a landlocked country sandwiched between big neighbors, and Nepal needs to balance them while not allowing them to gain too much influence in the country. And looking for other partners is a good move. But it is likely that Nepal will continue to be sandwiched in the future. Thank you for watching and please subscribe for more country neighbors.